The decks were slick with salt water. Wind scraped across the surface of the destroyer in steady bursts, rattling cable lines and sending low spray against the lower rigging. Overhead, a gray sky flattened the horizon. Waves pitched in short, mean arcs, clapping against the hull with the kind of rhythm that promised no relief. On the starboard side, the RHIB cradle sat locked and loaded, its launch rail gleaming from a recent coat of oil. 8 operators moved around it with focus, their boots hitting the non-skid with practiced weight. Each movement was sharp, clipped, efficient. No one lingered. No one looked around. Leah stood 6 meters off, out of the way but in clear line of sight. Her gloves were looped through the nylon belt on her hip, still dry despite the moisture in the air. She wore standard Navy tactical gear, sleeves cinched, chest plate fastened, and collar zipped tight against the wet. Her braid stuck to the back of her jacket, soaked from mist and salt. She kept her head turned toward the RHIB but made no effort to join the cluster of personnel. Her role was printed on the left chest tab in muted thread. Safety tether tech. It meant she clipped lines and stabilized anchor points. Nothing more. Chief Donovan paced the length of the launch rail, barking timeline calls over his shoulder. They had 7 minutes to stabilize the ladder, confirm magnetic hold, and drop the first climber. His voice carried easily above the engine rumble and radio bursts. Leah had heard it often. Clear. Sharp. With no room for suggestions from the sidelines. A weapons tech slapped the final breach pack into place. Another crew member shouted up a last confirmation. The boarding ladder, lightweight and coiled like a spine of metal ribs, was already affixed to the drop rail. It was fitted with high-strength magnets rated for vertical cling up to 100.0 kilograms of load in marine roll. It should have worked. It didn't. On the first drop, the RHIB surged forward in rhythm with the swell. The ladder made contact with the hull of the cargo vessel just off their bow, the magnets engaged. But as the target ship rocked left, the entire top third of the ladder twisted off angle. A lurch of metal followed. Then a thud as the ladder slipped and dropped hard into the water. A voice on comms called, "Ladder drifted. Negative hold." Chief Donovan cursed once. Reset and rotate the pivot bracket. He didn't look toward Leah. He didn't need her for this. She shifted her boots half a step to stabilize herself as another gust cut between the stacks. The noise of chain tensioners clicking and the muffled hiss of correction fluid from the gear lockers filled the next minute. The team re-rigged and attempted again. Second drop. Same swell. The RHIB held close. The ladder deployed. The magnets hit. For a moment, it looked clean. Then the cargo ship's yaw dipped hard to port, and the ladder began to shear again. The weight pulled sideways, caught in the arc of the water's movement, and the magnets let go halfway up. Another slip. Another failure. Magnet grip not syncing with roll rate, one of the junior techs muttered as he reeled the ladder back in. Another voice added, "We're gonna time out." Donovan raised his voice to the command tent. "One more drop or we pull back." "Copy." "Copy," came the reply. Leah said nothing. She kept her gloves looped, her posture neutral, but her eyes never left the curve of the ladder's sway. She adjusted a tether coil near her hip, the motion small, automatic. She had seen what was wrong after the first drop. The grip pattern was too linear, too flat for the hull contour they were up against. She knew it wouldn't hold without side tension, but no one had asked. And even if they did, she wasn't cleared to rig. Someone jogged past, nearly brushing her shoulder. The RHIB slammed once against the cradle bump rail. A deckhand cursed and dropped a clip. Leah watched without flinching. Her focus was elsewhere on the ladder, on the heave pattern of the swell, on the moment just before weight peeled metal from steel. She wasn't guessing. She knew. The wind picked up. Rain slicked down the side rail and disappeared into the waterline. A signal light flashed from the CIC above. The third and final attempt was coming. She stood still, heard every word, said nothing. Rain slid down her helmet in uneven streams, collecting in the folds of her collar before soaking into the stitching. The RHIB groaned in its cradle as another wave hit the hull and pitched everything forward a few degrees. Crew voices cut in and out over the comms net, some sharp with timing calls, others low and urgent with concern. They were nearly out of time. Final drop attempt. 3 minutes remaining. The voice from CIC repeated it flat and clean, like it was just another drill. Leah didn't move. Her hands remained at her sides, relaxed. Her left glove twitched once, brushing against the pouch on her belt. She could feel the outline of the cleat system inside rubber-wrapped, hand-rigged, tension-rated by her own calculations after hours of testing in the David Bay. It wasn't regulation gear. It wasn't even logged. But it worked. She had tested it during late watch rotations when the decks were quiet and the lighting dim. No one noticed. She had rerouted a damaged anchor point through a makeshift rail tension system, rebuilt from spare dive gear and cradle mounts scavenged after a hull inspection drill. She logged the angles, wave patterns, lateral roll, and rebound delay. She'd watched clips of unstable boardings from 6 deployments and built the entire system to solve one problem when a magnetic ladder failed to hold in unpredictable yaw. This was that exact moment. She said nothing. 2 meters ahead, the boarding team stood shoulder to shoulder, reviewing their loadout for what might become a canceled launch. One engineer was shouting to a tech over the RHIB's forward rail. "We can brute force the clamp line with anchor rope," he said, already reaching for it. Leah didn't need to speak to know it wouldn't work. Rope lash wouldn't flex. It would torque the ladder frame into a locked bend, maybe hold on contact, but almost certainly peel once the second climber moved. She had run that failure path in simulation, watched it fail on playback. She even logged it in her personal notebook, down to the rebound rate per meter. But again, no one asked. Rain intensified. The water slicked down the side of the rig cage, pooling against the folded blast mat. She stepped slightly backward to avoid a runoff streak. Her boots locked into the deck grate with a familiar click. Everything was muscle memory. Everything was clean. Her mind tracked the timing. Ship yaw every 4.8 seconds. Wave set running port to starboard in pairs. The target vessel had a modified superstructure that flattened the swell hit rate, but that only worsened the magnet delay. She logged the difference, silently, in her head. She could have recited the friction values if asked. She wasn't asked. Her braid clung to her vest at the shoulder. The weight of the water had darkened the nylon nearly black. She blinked once, watched the RHIB crew brace for the third drop. They looked tired, soaked, and tight-jawed. Not defeated, but running out of theory. A memory cut clean across her focus. Cyprus. Early spring. A boarding drill run off calm waters. Minimal swell. Basic magnetic entry. They had prepped in silence. She remembered the weight of the anchor spool on her forearm. The harness kept slipping low on one side. As they rotated the frame, she noticed the pivot bolt on the clamp was set off angle by almost 7 degrees. The magnet had twisted on contact, just enough to cause a drag curl. She pointed it out to Chief Donovan. He didn't even pause. "You clip straps," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You don't touch clamps." That was the last time she offered an unsolicited correction. From then on, she studied quietly. She asked for second shift rig rotation so she could re-walk ladder drops without interruption. She spent weeks memorizing torque variants under partial load. No one questioned why. No one noticed the extra hours. She kept her notes taped behind the inspection hatch in her locker. Back in the present, the RHIB jolted again as a hook snapped into position. One of the newer techs nearly lost his footing. A curse cut across the line. Leah didn't flinch. Her hand brushed the side pouch once more. The cleat system inside was no larger than a fist. Built from a modified cradle cam and a wrapped shock plate, it was designed to absorb lateral load before it hit the ladder's spine. She had built it for this. She had built it for them. No one knew. No one had ever asked. Rain hammered the RHIB canopy as voices snapped louder over the comms net. One more drop. That was it. Donovan made the call, voice clipped but tight with urgency. Lock it by force, he ordered. Pin the base and pray it holds. No one laughed. There was no time for jokes now. Two of the team members grabbed thick rope lash and started securing the lower end of the ladder frame, pulling the magnet spine tight along a new tension guide. The plan was simple. Anchor the base using brute strength and hope that would counteract the drift. Leah watched from her position just outside the main circle, hands still at her sides. She knew exactly what would happen next. The RHIB moved out again. The ladder was lifted into place. Rain streaked sideways across the team's vests. Contact made. For a second, it looked like it held. Then, the cargo vessel yawed again, tilting with the swell. The rope line flexed unevenly, torquing the ladder frame into a locked bend. The magnets peeled from the hull almost instantly. The top half twisted outward, scraping hard against the steel. A loud crack followed as the spine folded into itself and dropped. The RHIB veered away to avoid being fouled by the failed rig. Negative hold. Someone snapped over comms. Ladder drifted. Frames off axis. Voice flat. Expected. No one sounded surprised. Leah reached down and opened the pouch at her belt. The cleat rig slid into her palm, smooth and tight-wrapped in rubber. The carabiner was polished from use. She stepped forward without a word. A junior tech caught her movement. He turned his head, then said quietly, "She's doing something with the anchor rig." It was not alarm, just confusion. Donovan turned. His stare locked on her. "What are you doing?" His voice didn't rise, but the weight behind it stopped other hands mid-motion. Leah stepped closer to the RHIB's rail and spoke without hesitation. "Side tension, wave delay lag, forward deflection mod. It's tested." "You're not cleared for clamp hardware," Donovan replied. "No anger, just rules." She met his eyes. "And you're out of time." She clipped into the RHIB tie-down and leaned forward across the anchor rail. The cleat was no larger than her palm, but every contour had been measured and adjusted. She fed the line through the RHIB's forward ring and snapped the tension loop shut with clean hands. Rain lashed her sleeves and helmet. She didn't blink. Her focus didn't shift. Donovan said nothing more. He didn't stop her either. The rest of the crew stood still, watching her work. One man adjusted his harness as if trying to realign his posture. Another shifted slightly to the side and stared down at the cleat. The ladder lay coiled behind them, water pooling beneath the rungs. No one moved to touch it yet. Leah looked over once. "Drop on the yaw rise. Next 4-point cycle. The cleat will counterbend." "Who tested this?" someone asked quietly. "I did," she said. "That was all." Donovan gave a short nod. Not approval. Just release. "Rig it," he said. The ladder was raised again. The RHIB surged forward into the swell. This time, Leah stood behind the tie-down, one hand on the anchor line. The cleat held. The deck pitched. The rain came harder. No one spoke as the magnets snapped back into place. The final setup moved with no wasted motion. Leah kept both boots braced against the RHIB's rail as she adjusted the last loop of the secondary lash. Her cleat system slid into position against the tension guide with the sound of rubber catching on soaked aluminum. She tightened the loop, checked the tension by feel, then dropped the tail of the line into the deck channel so it wouldn't catch underfoot. Her hands moved with a kind of practiced calm, not rushed, not hesitant. Every motion came from repetition and planning. No one helped her. No one stopped her either. The rain fell harder now, slicing across the RHIB in steady curtains. The boarding crew stood nearby but said nothing. One of them adjusted a knee strap with slow fingers. Another blinked water from his eyes and rechecked the cinch on his vest. Chief Donovan stood 3 meters off, one hand resting on the RHIB railing. His expression didn't change. He said nothing at all. Leah tapped the line twice with her gloved finger. The cleat flexed, then settled. Tension was even across both sides. She made a micro-adjustment on the lash angle, reset the clip, and breathed out. just once, just to steady her body. The RHIB surged forward, bow angling slightly starboard to match the drift pattern they had failed to compensate for all morning. Water smashed against the hull and mist rolled off the forward rail in sheets. The ladder swung into place, now guided not just by the motion of the RHIB, but by the pressure geometry of the tensioned line. When the magnets struck the hull of the cargo vessel, they did so with a clean, audible snap. A second passed, then two. "Contact," someone called. The voice wasn't surprised, just waiting. The ladder held. No yaw drift, no twisting. The spine stayed centered against the steel. The magnets were flush, still holding. Leah's right hand stayed on the cleat, feeling the vibration in the line. It was holding exactly as it had in the simulation. She let her eyes flick briefly to the sky, then back down to the rail. "Locked," the tech at the forward bracket said. His voice was low but certain. The boarding officer didn't speak. He moved forward in silence, clipped into the ascent line, and began to climb. Rain splashed against his helmet as he rose. Each boot step landed clean on the rungs. At the top, he paused, nodded once, and disappeared over the rail. The second climber followed without hesitation. Then a third, then two more. Each one ascended smoothly, calmly, using the stabilized ladder like it had never failed them. Leah didn't move. Her fingers rested against the cleat's cam loop. Her shoulders remained square. Her braid was soaked, stuck to the side of her vest. Her gloves were heavy now, but her grip was firm. She was still watching, still checking. The sixth operator clicked in. Rain fell in thick ropes now, hammering the RHIB's stern deck. He moved slower than the others, but with equal confidence. He climbed clean, paused just below the railing, then keyed his comm set. Boarding successful, entry clear. That was all. No emotion, just the result. No one said anything. Not on the RHIB. Not in the command tent. For several seconds, there was only the sound of water and wind. Donovan didn't speak. He didn't look at Leah. The team members began rechecking gear. Someone coiled a loose sling without looking up. One of the younger techs glanced once at the cleat, then away. Leah remained crouched by the tie-down rail, palm still pressed against the cleat she had built. Her expression didn't shift. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't tense. She looked like someone waiting for the next step that never came. The RHIB floated steadier now. The slap of hull on water softened. The sway dropped by degrees. They were no longer fighting the sea. They had found rhythm. Someone murmured behind her. It wasn't a compliment, just acknowledgement. She held it. That was all they said. No one followed with a second line. No one argued. Donovan walked slowly across the RHIB. He passed within arm's reach but didn't speak. He looked once toward the cleat, then turned his head toward the cargo ship. Leah finally stood. She eased herself up with a quiet motion, shoulders square, hands steady. She began checking the lash system again, not because she doubted it, but because that's what you do. You verify. You finish the job clean. Her boots made soft contact with the deck grate as she moved. Rain soaked the back of her collar and ran down her spine. Her gloves squelched slightly with each movement. None of it distracted her. The mission hadn't ended. It had just shifted. Now it was moving without her again. And that was fine. No one thanked her. No one issued a commendation. The rig worked. The team climbed. The entry cleared. The rest would go on as if the system had always been there. Leah rewrapped the tail line with quiet hands. She clipped the slack to the RHIB eyelet, cinched the secondary loop, and nodded once to no one at all. Confirmation came over the comms again, this time with more clarity. Boarding successful. Entry clear. Inside the command tent, heads turned toward the audio console. The mission lead, Lieutenant Rivers, glanced at the main screen, where the stabilized feed showed the boarding team breaching the hatch on the cargo ship. No jostling, no ladder swing. The RHIB drifted just below the contact point, calm in the chop. An ensign at the sensor panel narrowed his eyes. We didn't greenlight the bracket change. That's not the factory cleat. Another operator leaned forward. That rig's not from our locker. Lieutenant Rivers lowered his voice slightly. Who stabilized the ladder? The question landed without urgency, but it carried a weight the entire room felt. No one answered at first. On the RHIB, the boarding team began transmitting room-by-room clearance updates. Clean cabin, engine space secure, cargo manifest matched. Their tone was professional, but not routine. Something had shifted. The chaos had broken. Now they were working inside something that held. Back on the RHIB deck, Leah took a half step back from the rail. Her hand dropped from the cleat. She didn't make a sound. Her gloves, soaked through from the rain, made a faint creak as she flexed her fingers. The rig stayed exactly as she left it. Locked. Loaded. Tension perfect. One of the boarding officers climbed back down to the deck and paused before disconnecting his ascent hook. He looked at the cleat for a moment, then at Leah. He didn't speak. The comm line in the tent chirped again. A tech turned toward Rivers. Sir, the cleat mod's not logged in our loadout. It didn't come from topside inventory. That wasn't our clamp, someone muttered near the back of the room. The silence that followed was sharper now. It wasn't surprise. It was dawning understanding. Donovan's voice came through the RHIB channel, not clipped, not hostile, just low. She wasn't even cleared to touch it. No one replied. Leah adjusted the slack line and cinched it once at the tie-down rail. She moved with the same steady rhythm as before. Task over. Mission still running. The ladder was locked. The team was on board. Her work was done. The red tag on her belt fluttered slightly in the crosswind standard issue support designation, damp and fading at the edges. It caught the eye of the same tech who'd whispered earlier. He didn't say anything now, just watched her finish the coil. Inside the command tent, Lieutenant Rivers looked back at the video feed. The team had breached the final cargo hold. No contact, no surprises. Everything had gone smooth once the ladder held. He made a note on the clipboard without speaking, then set it aside. The footage from the hull camera was still live. The camera angle caught a glimpse of Leah's position, one figure crouched by the RHIB rail, checking line tension while the other stood tall in gear and rifles. She wasn't in shadow, but no spotlight hit her either. The ensign toggled the external sensor overlay. Sir, the cleat's holding at lateral force 10.6. The standard gear flexes at 7. It's outperforming baseline, Rivers said, almost to himself. In the RHIB cradle, the last boarding officer stepped back from the ladder and looked down at the deck. He ran one hand along the tension line and then looked up at Donovan, who gave a faint nod. Line's good, the officer said. It didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like a correction. Leah stood quietly near the back rail, hands folded at her vest line. Her braid was still soaked through, stuck against the inside edge of her collar. She glanced at the ladder once more, then looked toward the ship. Her face remained neutral. She had nothing to add. Another crew member came up behind her, paused, and gently nudged the cleat with the toe of his boot. It didn't move. Built tight, he said. Leah didn't answer. She was already reaching for the secondary pack straps to begin the teardown. Her pace never shifted. Her movements were the same as they had been before the climb. Behind her, a second tech moved toward the line of gear crates. He looked over his shoulder and then leaned slightly toward another support rating. Who is she, he asked. The other shrugged. Clamp support, I think. On the mission record, her name was listed as line support only. There would be no entry for the cleat, no record of its modification, no procedure note, just the result. The op summary report from CIC noted the boarding time. It marked the final climb as secure. It did not mention why the ladder held this time and not the two before. Back on deck, Donovan finally spoke again. His voice was quiet but aimed toward Leah. You ran that rig clean. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. She said, Yes, Chief. That was it. She pulled her gloves off slowly, wrung out the cuffs, and tucked them back into her belt. Her fingers were pale and wrinkled from the cold, but she moved steadily. She didn't shiver. The ladder stayed exactly where it had been placed. The RHIB rocked slightly as the swell shifted again, but the line tension held. Behind her, the rest of the crew began returning to their stations. A few glanced back at her. None spoke. In the command tent, Rivers watched her on the feed a few seconds longer. Then he toggled off the camera. The record didn't need commentary. It had proof. She wasn't even cleared to touch it. But she had, and it worked. The storm had passed by the time the RHIB returned to its cradle. The crew moved with the same quiet efficiency they always had, stowing lines, logging inventory, and stripping gear in silence. The chop had faded to low rhythm. Salt hung in the air. Overhead, clouds stretched low and dull. But the wind had dropped. Leah was the last one off the RHIB. She unhooked the cleat from the anchor point herself, checked the lash line tension one last time, and wrapped the coils slowly from end to end. No one offered to help. No one stood nearby. She didn't seem to notice either way. She carried the cleat in both hands up the port stairwell and back across the main deck. Her boots left wet prints behind her. The rig was still damp, its rubber wraps streaked with salt. She stopped at the gear bench near the aft rigging station, laid out a towel, and began drying the cleat with slow, steady movements. Her motions were careful, deliberate, and without ceremony. Not rushed, not proud, just focused. Elsewhere on the ship, the crew filtered back to their compartments. The mission had gone off clean after the breach. The cargo manifest had matched. No weapons, no escalation. Just a long file report and a clean clear on the board. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. Inside the lower deck berthing bay, Leah reached her bunk and eased the footlocker open. She stripped off her vest in silence, unzipped the front panel, and laid it gently across the bench. Her braid was still damp. Strands curled from the wind and pressed against the side of her collar. She unwound it slowly, finger by finger, then wiped her hands and tucked the braid behind her ear. She reached into the locker and pulled out a soft-bound notebook. The cover was scuffed, edges frayed. Inside, dozens of hand-sketched diagrams filled the first half of the pages. Tension loops, cleat patterns, friction data, wave response logs. She turned to the last completed page and began writing. Sea state at ladder contact moderate chop. Yaw interval 4.8 seconds. Magnet hold delay 1.4. Lateral tension load 10.6. She paused, then added stability index maintained under full load. No recoil slip observed. She flipped to the back of the book. A blank page waited. She pulled a pencil stub from the spine and began sketching a tighter cleat body. Smaller profile. Faster clip response. She added a notation for lateral flex locking and side spool compatibility. Then paused again. She shaded the locking cam slightly darker. Labeled the angle. Nothing dramatic. Just cleaner. Outside the compartment, someone walked past. Their voice trailed back into the hallway. She fixed it without even being asked. Another replied, quieter. It wasn't even on the checklist. Neither voice lingered, neither name was said, but she heard it. Leah finished the sketch. She tore a strip of cloth from an old towel and wrapped the cleat, careful not to trap moisture. She resealed it into a dry bag and clipped it closed. Then she placed it back inside her locker, set the notebook beside it, and closed the lid. Her gloves sat folded on the bunk above. She picked them up, turned them once in her hand, then placed them gently at the foot of her bed. The salt had dried stiff along the edges, but the fabric was intact, ready again. She sat on the lower bunk for a moment, just long enough to stretch her shoulders and rotate her wrists. She wasn't sore. Not really. Just aware of the day's weight. Her muscles felt used but not worn. It was a clean kind of tired, the kind earned by solving something without being seen. A knock echoed at the edge of the bulkhead. One of the junior techs poked his head in. They're calling for line checks on the next rotation. You in? Leah didn't look up. Yeah, I'll be there in 5. He hesitated a moment, then nodded and left. His boots echoed down the passageway. She stood, zipped her coverall halfway, and grabbed a clean pair of gloves from her stowed kit. She tucked the notebook back under the locker brace, right where it always lived, and gave it one final press down. Then she stepped into the passageway. Outside, the ship moved slow and steady across calmer water. The RHIB cradle hung clean and dry. The tension rail was recoiled. The cleat slot was empty. The rain had stopped completely. In the command tent earlier, the after-action report had been finalized. The last line on page 4 read, "Stabilization rig effective. Source unclear. Cleared for re-evaluation." No name followed, no notation, just the outcome. That was enough. Somewhere on the mess deck, 2 sailors sat over instant coffee. One of them retold the moment with a few words. She just stepped up. Didn't even raise her voice. The other nodded. It held, though. The first replied, "Yeah, held better than standard." They didn't know her name either. Back on deck, Leah walked into the open air, gloves in hand. She clipped them to her vest out of habit and paused at the edge of the starboard rail. The ocean stretched wide and gray, cut only by the ship's wake. The motion was steady, no tilt, no slam. Another op would come, another boarding, another problem. And when it did, she'd be ready. Not for credit, just for the climb. Leah was never asked to lead, never cleared to fix what mattered most. But she watched, she studied, and when failure left no other option, she stepped forward not for praise, not for recognition, but because she could. Her quiet resolve, her hidden preparation, and her steady hands changed the outcome of a mission no one thought she had a place in. There were no medals, no applause, just a cleat that held, a ladder that stayed, and a team that made it home. Sometimes strength is not loud. Sometimes it looks like silence in the rain and a notebook no one else reads. If her story moved you, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever been overlooked, only to prove your worth in action? Share your thoughts in the comments and follow for more quiet, powerful stories like this one. There are more voices like Leah's, and they deserve to be heard.